Welcome committee members, liaisons, and members.
Vicky, your sound is a little bit low. It's hard to hear.
Can you hear me better?
Yeah.
Okay. Welcome committee members, liaisons, and members of the public to the Legal Services Trust Fund Commission Executive Committee meeting. Thank you for joining us. We're using Zoom with the goal to foster a more inclusive environment and effective meeting. If you would like to comment on the meeting, please type "I have a comment" or "I have a question" in the chat, and a message will be sent to the host. Alternatively, you can also use the raise hand feature. In efforts of transparency for all those joining this public meeting, whether by phone or Zoom, we request that you refrain from having side conversations on chat about the content of the meeting. Again, the chat feature is utilized simply as a tool for you to virtually indicate that you would like to speak in order to help the chair facilitate the discussion. A friendly reminder that going forward, all Legal Services Trust Fund Commission and committee meetings will be recorded and posted to the State Bar website. Another reminder that this is a video conference and to please be aware of your surroundings behind you. If you would like to use your phone to dial into this meeting, please be sure your computer's microphone is on mute to avoid audio feedback issues. And lastly, while joining audio via computer is highly recommended, if an individual loses audio, they can call in separately using the Zoom conference number.
Great. Thank you, Vicky. Eric Bonachet, would you like me to do roll call vote now?
Yes, or just roll call, right?
Yes, roll call.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No worries.
Bonachet Gluggy,
Yes, here.
Eric Iskin,
Here.
Rich Reines,
Here.
Kim Savage.
Here.
Oh, hooray.
Great. And I'll do staff. Andrea Fatanides, she's running a little late. She'll join us around 10:30. Dan Pasamenik.
Here.
Brady Dewar.
Here.
Are there any other members of the public on the call right now? I don't see anybody else.
No,
Right. Okay. So then no public comments.
no
then.
public comments. Okay, great.
Okay.
So should we move on to approving the meeting summary action items from January the 6th, 2020?
Yes.
So moved.
And I'll second.
Okay. I'll do roll call. Bonachet,
Yes.
Eric,
Yes.
Rich.
I think I have to abstain. I wasn't at the meeting.
You don't have to, but you can. It can be. You can treat it as a vote of confidence in the record note taker.
So voted.
Okay, great. Kim,
Yes.
great. Motion passes.
Great.
Great.
Can you hold on just a second? Because my roll sheet isn't working properly. And I haven't got that roll taken. It's just insisting that there's a problem with my formula, which there shouldn't be one.
Well, I have one of two.
Okay,
Dan, so
thank you.
It's easy enough. Everybody voted yes. So
I appreciate that. I'm just like kind of locked up here for a second.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
And we do have a person dialing in, a 323 number.
oh, 323 number. Okay. Can you unmute the person and we'll ask if they want to introduce himself.
There we go. They've been unmuted.
Hi, a member of the public. Would you like to introduce yourself? My name is Dawn Wing. I'm a program supervisor in the Office of Access and Inclusion.
Good morning, Duan. I would like to introduce myself. My name is William Bushelli, member.
Hi, William.
LSFP.
Thank you for joining us.
How's it going?
Great. So we're gonna put you back on mute until the attendees.
That's
Would
fine.
you like to make public comments? I'm sorry.
Oh, no, I don't have any.
Okay, great. So Bonachet, Eric, I'll turn it back over to you for the next agenda item.
Right. I think, Eric, we're just moving into discussing the improvements on to the grant administration process, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yep.
So I think, I mean, I can start off and then Eric and Bonachet, you can elaborate too. So I think today's meeting is a prime example of, we're very heavily meetings, as you all know, and Eric confused today's meeting with the HP meeting. So, and he's not the only one. So I think if we can brainstorm ways to kind of improve the administration of all the meetings for, I think, commissioners and staff and the public as well. That'd be great. And I think Bonachet and I had, and Eric had spoke previously, and we wanted this to be kind of a brainstorming session with all of us. Kim, Rich, who have been on the commission for quite a number of years. I know we've ramped up on meetings, and there's just a lot more process that's been happening the last few years. So how do we kind of reach a good balance so it's tenable for volunteers and for staff too?
You know, I don't expect that the ball's really totally tossed into my court, but my reaction is that one of the problems is compression. We compress all of our meetings into a relatively short end of year kind of period, and that puts a great burden on the commission and staff, much more on staff. But even so, commission's not only responsible for attending meetings, but for preparing in advance, and sometimes the materials are thick. If we could spread it out more over the course of a year, I think the burden would be lighter than it currently is, if there's any way to do that. I know the grant process works slowly towards in the beginning of the year, but if there's some way to spread it out, it would be easier.
Yeah, so where our hands are a little bit tied is IOLTA and EF, in that there's an expectation in the community, and you know, literally people at programs plan their vacation around when our IOLTA application is due. The grant staff and the executive management to be available around that time in case there's an eligibility review conference. They know that there is a short timeline to get back to us, and also because of we need it to be released a little bit later in the year so that they have time in order to complete their audits, because we have to look back at expenditures the previous year. So with IOLTA and EF, I don't think there's much flexibility in terms of releasing applications in what is it, April, and having them due back May, June, so that we start the review process. All the other grants, there's a little bit more flexibility, and that's why over the years we've moved up partnership grants. So that's kind of the first grant that gets done out of the year. And it's always our hope that by the time we go into EEF and IOLTA, partnership grants would have been close to tied up or finished. I'm sorry, but it hasn't always worked that way because there are pending partnership grant issues. Sometimes the number that we get from the judicial council, we're also waiting for the number from the judicial council to know exactly how much awards is. So we'd like to wrap up partnership grant by the July commission meeting. The last 2 years, we've had to push it to the August meeting, which, as you know, is very heavy IOLTA and EF.
Right.
I think the one, what threw a wrench in it this year was HP, because the legislation itself wasn't even passed until the summertime. And then the compression with the pandemic, with us giving programs more time to review IOLTA and EF just made it, I mean, you all know, the staff was working on the weekends over the span of several months. And then the commissioners were so involved, and I think rightfully so, with eligibility and budget review in the conferences. And we didn't have any programs, even though come back on appeal, because we did such a good job. But that meant it was just a lot of work for commissioners and staff. So HP, you know, it's hard to say. I don't know if that funding is going to come back again next year, but if it does, I imagine it will be around that time again, because that's when the legislative cycle.
And I see we've actually been given more work to do, because there's that program for funding new provisionally licensed lawyers.
Yes.
Will require another RFP.
Yes, and I have a suggestion for that when we get to that agenda item.
I'd like to return just to the discussion a bit. One of the things we've done with the other foundations that I work on is we try to change the funding cycle.
Yeah.
And you know, obviously we're caught in a tension between getting the money out as quickly as possible, because the harm increases, the need is greater. But on the other hand, our duty is to see to it that the money is distributed as in accordance with the enabling legislation and our basic purpose. So there's this tension between getting it out quickly and doing the work properly, and not you know, making our calendar so crowded that we are doing less than the right job. So if we have bank grants or HP grants or extraordinary grants like these, or maybe this new program, can we change the funding cycle? What we did in the other foundation is we moved from, I think, an October funding to an April funding for purposes of relieving the need to review grants of many different kinds at the same time.
That is an idea. It's very hard for us on reporting because we have to go and aggregate a lot of the data at some point, sometimes across different sources of funding, and to not have it aligned on the calendar year makes it really hard for us to aggregate the data. It's not impossible. It just is hard. And I don't know if you recall, I mean, Eric, this is before Eric came on, but Kim, Rich, and Bonachet, there was a time that IELTS and EF were not on the same grant calendar.
That's right.
And it was a nightmare and caused a lot of heartache for programs and staff. And we worked for so many years, and this is before my time. I was at a program when this actually was happening, so Dan can speak to this, but it was a victory that we were able to get that aligned into one application and to be on a calendar year. But it's not a bad suggestion, but I think I'd be hesitant to move in that direction now unless we had more grant funding.
But just as a
So-
follow-up, do we have the possibility of doing it statutorily? I mean, can we change the dates?
You can change the date, but
Yeah.
you would definitely need buy-in from the community because the expectation now that's on a calendar year. And I imagine that if something like that, we would probably want to survey the community, say that this is happening. You know, we moved up IELTS and EF grant application up last year before the pandemic by about 3 weeks. And we got a lot of complaints from programs. And that was so we can be alleviated and to give programs a little bit more time to respond. And I can't even tell you the phone calls that I fielded because of that.
You know, so much of our funding is for wages. And if operationally boots on the ground, it means that the programs have to recruit people and have them come on board at the same time as our funding in order to meet their obligations. So I think we have to keep that in mind. But
Yeah.
To me, the opportunity is change the funding cycle for extraordinary grants. And maybe that would relieve some of the pressure.
Yeah. And my suggestion, Kim, for bank grants is if you do release an RFP, we should do it as early as possible in the calendar year, as feasible. With that said, we have to get board approval, and there's layers, so it's not as easy as said, but that would be our suggestion. So that partnership and bank grants go perhaps earlier in the year before IELTS and EF.
Yeah.
Right. I think it's that recent HP money that I think really kind of took everybody over the top.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so, of course, we want to be able to use the funds and distribute them to the community. But I think that's what I think really kind of put us in this position we're in now. And obviously, we can't ask really the legislature for us to slow down the distribution. But I just think we should maybe kind of keep that in mind on perspective on how difficult it's been recently.
Yeah. Well, are there any practical suggestions for next year? Like, again, we don't know if there's going to be more HP money for just what's on the calendar.
Is your question practical suggestions for
Yeah,
the
for the-
extraordinary grants like Rich is speaking to, like the HP money?
Well, just something that we can bring back to the commissioners next week that we can say, because, I don't think it's just the four of you that are feeling that it's the commission has been a lot of work. So just anything that we can do, even if it's just like the administration of like us staff communicating, like what are suggestions that could help commissioners with the heavy workload? I know that there are commissioners that have already asked to be only on one committee, for example, and obviously we work with them, we accommodate them. Is there anything else that
I think it's
help?
been great. I think the discipline of getting the materials out approximately a week before the meeting has been very helpful.
Okay.
Has been a good improvement. I continually think the memos could be shortened. There tends to be a lot of background material in the memos that could be relegated to appendices.
Yeah, and we can try doing that a better job of that. The only thing that that we're trying to balance also is like it is our public record, and so if someone picks it up, it's not the memos are not just for the benefit of commissioners, but they really are for the public. And anybody that picks it up knows that, like for instance, HP, it was a really thorough, thoughtful kind of process, and that's why we try to have it contained in a memo. Like if you read the memo, you understand what's going on instead of having to refer to something else. But I think with that said, you're right. We could condense it a lot more. I would say with the exception, I really think with the IELTS and EF eligibility stuff, that should be a kind of a record because it's our paper trail.
Yeah,
Of why
no, I don't.
but I think with all the other stuff, and I know, well, we're posting the materials today for next week's meeting. There are some agenda items we don't even have a memo because it was getting, what we wanted you to concentrate on was this IELTS statutory change, and some of the things from HP, it's already been elevated to the committee in terms of the process. So all we did was present the spreadsheet instead of a lengthy memo. So that's where we're trying to like save time so that the commissioners don't have to read. We'll present it in a PowerPoint where we can, and we'll present it in a PowerPoint.
One of the things that came up in our sessions, at the entire commission sessions, it was that there was a dichotomy between those who looked at the body of the application and those who looked at the budget. And then I guess there was another group that looked at both with equal interest. Maybe you could do a budgetary analysis since it's numeric, separate. Maybe there could be a budget summary of the applications so that we could compare them side by side. When Chris pointed out to a lot of us that he took offense at the fact that we were paying for rent in the HP loans applications, that point struck home with me, and it made me really focus on the budgets more. But I noticed that other people, by the end of the, as Eric points out, the applications are so long, by the time you get to the budget, it seems secondary.
And I guess with the budget, I mean, that's a good point that I'd like to hear more feedback on, because I know, like, for the staff, we're used to like kind of looking at budgets. It's hard for, like, for instance, I was asked to kind of run through the analysis, and it really is like a lot of factors, and staff, we get together and we hash it out, and we meet for hours just on the budget alone over several iterations. It's very hard to kind of summarize even one budget, how, the thought process is, because it's a very involved process. And so that's why, we have offered as staff to come up with the original, the starting point for the funding ranges. Then there are some commissioners that feel a bit more comfortable, like Chris, and I would say you too, Rich, because you've been on a foundation, looking at a budget and understanding that. Should we, we've always said, if the commissioner feels comfortable, then you should, but then it does create, like, some groups, the commissioners are reviewing it a little closer, and some groups they're not. Should that be a more, and it's not staff driven, but should staff then take charge of coming up with a recommendation, or would you want us to try to train up commissioners to have that expertise to be able to review a little bit closer?
One of the things that might be helpful is for you to point out to us that there are budget issues for this applicant.
Okay.
For a particular applicant.
Yeah.
That would help us then focus on the ones that might be problematic.
Okay, yeah, we can absolutely do that. And, in our staff debrief of just HP alone, we think the next go around, whatever grant has a score and rubric, that there'll be more calibration sessions before we actually break and go review our own, because we had that one application for HP that we reviewed. But then we just then talked about it in our working group. Our suggestion would be then not just to take one application, but perhaps take 3 or 4, and then meet back as a larger group one time to make sure we're all on the same page. I think that was definitely a big learning lesson that would help with discretionary grants and scoring rubrics. And that's what they do in admissions for when they grade bar exams. There's several calibration sessions. It's not just one. And I think that was lost on us in the design because we had never used a score rubric before.
In terms of the calendar.
Sorry, go ahead, Eric.
Sorry.
No, you go ahead.
I'm just wondering if we're overreacting to kind of a heavy load at the end of the year. As we look through the whole year, I mean, it seems to me the early months of the year are relatively quiet. Am I wrong about that?
No, yeah, the February meeting, there's nothing up. Well, I shouldn't say nothing up that's grant related that you need to vote on. There might be some other pending things like, a late carryover request or budget modification, but nothing of significance. Like, you're not determining grant awards at that February meeting. it starts up in the middle of the year when you go to talk about IOLTA distribution. And then, the big question next year is, are you going to keep some reserve? Or are you going to distribute it all because IOLTA funding is now low? And then a lot of the grants work is the last 2 meetings. So the February meeting is very light, unless you want to build in more substantive. And we could take that as an opportunity to build in a bit more training for the commission. I know Elizabeth and I had talked about perhaps doing an implicit bias training for commissioners. Brady will do his Bagley-Keene training again as a reminder for everyone. So that it's an opportunity to get some substantive support for commissioners. And we could do a budget workshop or something along that line, Rich. That's helpful.
So this line item was to discuss improvements to grants administration process, right? And what I remember, and I think we spoke about this, Eric, Dwan, and myself, that we used to rely heavily on staff. Staff would come in to these meetings, and we would hear the briefing, we would hear the updates, and I can't even think of the number of times, but how often, it was often, that we would turn to staff and we would ask staff for staff's recommendation. Because you all are doing this every day. Some of you, probably most of you, are doing it 7 days a week. Many of you are doing it into the late hours of the night. How do we know? We receive your emails. And so I think I think there needs to be a calibration on the commission side vis-a-vis the staff in allowing for staff to bring us your good thinking, which is always and often, and to rely on what you bring us and your recommendations. So I don't know if we as commission members need to do as much as we have been doing of late. And I think that's been because of the transitions in the office and all of the stuff that we know. But maybe that could help in terms of rebalancing how much is on the commission's plate. Yeah, I think there's something there for us to look at and explore. We don't need to redo all of your work, right? I mean, you've already doing the work. And I'm just thinking about the HP meetings, and when staff would come and say, well, this is staff's recommendation. This is what we saw, because we see all 39 applications, whereas you guys are seeing 9 applications or so. And there's that point to rely on the word of the staff, which we need to do, and we did often. So I don't know if from a practical perspective, as you're asking, Dwan, I think that's something for us to start to think about and how to re-engage that relationship.
I agree with what's just been said. I'm trying to recall if what happened previously was that staff would come to the commission or a committee with those grant applications where they were not sure, where there was a difference of opinion among the staff, and that the commission would, or committee would weigh in on those. But otherwise, we would be presented with all the information, but on top of that big pile would be staff's recommendations.
That's right. That's right.
And I mean, I'm concerned about the amount of time everybody is spending, but also in terms of getting future commission members, if they start hearing what the workload is, they might not be so anxious to volunteer.
I think that most of the, much of our time previously was spent with problem children. And it was, I always thought, sort of disproportionate, but we relied on staff to point out to us, there's an issue here, not even because of a staff disagreement, but because staff concluded that this was an issue, and before turning down an applicant, They wanted the commission to look it over and give another set of eyes to what the staff noted as a problem. Kim's right. I mean, I think we could do this more on a problem child basis than looking at every grant application. There are some that are no-brainers, and really focus on those that give staff heartburn.
I thought that this year we pretty much did that. I mean, there were like 100 and some IOLTA applicants, and staff's good work really narrowed it down to about 6, right? That there were issues for, and I think we appropriately delved into those 6 as commissioners, and I think we did a pretty good job. So I don't know that much was broken there, in my opinion, anyway. And I'm trying to think, when I hear you folks talk about what we could do less of, one thing that comes to mind are things like, audit extension requests, what seems to me to be kind of minor stuff, but some commissioners think it's a big deal. Like for me, it's a no-brainer if somebody turns in an audit like 2 hours late and staff decides to recommend. Do we even have to spend time on that? But there are some commissioners who think it's a big deal and they want to spend time on it. And I can't say they're wrong necessarily. They do maybe have a good point. Or, budget deferrals and carryovers and things. A lot of that stuff to me is just let staff make the decision. But on the other hand, we do have a role to play in that. I mean, I think we have to be looking at significant deviations and carryovers. So I don't know. I guess what I'm saying is I don't know that anything definitely is broken about the way I think we are deferring to staff appropriately, I guess is what I'm saying.
I think the issue came up more with the HP, the recent funding. Eric, I mean, I agree with you on how the IOLTA and EAF went. And I think that is staff's role, and they do bring forward what Rich refers to as the problem children. But really, also just where there's a where there's a question. I also agree with Eric that turning in an audit 2 days late, the question if that's going to be accepted is the staff the commission does not need to be involved in that is a staff discretionary matter. And staff knows the pattern of the programs, and they have a much deeper knowledge. That's their job. They're paid to do that.
Well, except there is a state bar rule.
Pardon?
There is a state bar rule, and that the staff doesn't make that decision when it's turned in late, the audit and the application. So we would have to, if there is a change in process and who gets to approve that, it would need to go through codification, and we would need to change the state bar rule for late.
Right now, the commission has to.
Yeah, right now, the way the state bar rule is written is that staff has discretion to approve audits up until the date of the application. But if it's beyond the date of the application, then it's the commission, and then the commission has authority to approve late applications under extraordinary circumstances. So staff doesn't have that discretion right now.
Well, this has been an extraordinary year, which is partly why I think we feel so weighted down.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think a lot of this will probably have to wait till codification to take a deeper dive and see where the role of the commission and staff can be recalibrated. And I think budget revisions and modification is a good example of that. Where is it that, I mean, it's just a lot of process now, and it does tend to feel like, at least from my perspective, we have a lot of meetings around that. We prepare a lot of materials, and I agree that the recommendation is usually that you approve the staff recommendation. So perhaps designing it so that the commission is an oversight body, but of carryover and budget. But I don't know if it's the best use of all of our time that you're in the weeds looking at those requests.
We have to keep in mind that statutorily the commission takes appeals. When an applicant is turned down for any reason and they want to appeal it, it comes to the commission. And that's by statute, right, Brady?
Oh,
that's rule.
Brady, you're on mute. Brady,
that one's a rule.
Yeah. So
yeah.
So when it comes to us, we have to continue to play our role. And at the risk of Bob Planthold getting angry at me, we are sword and shield. We're there to protect both the trustees and staff when tough decisions come about. And we ought to be used by staff in that role. Staff ought to be able to say, we brought this to the commission, and this is what we're supposed to do, and commission's voted down. Very sorry, come back next year.
That's right. That's right.
We can't relinquish that role.
No, and that's been helpful, and that's absolutely yes. We rely staff on that partnership with the commission to be able to both as staff, play the enforcement compliance, and as well as giving them proper and useful technical assistance that the commission is helping us with the compliance piece.
Well, I think this is a conversation that's obviously not complete here, and we're probably going to be revisiting it a number of times in this year and perhaps in the future. But I think this is a good starting point as we're kind of thinking through, and there's going to be a point where I'm assuming there'll be a point where Kim, Rich, and myself won't be on the commission any longer. I don't know at this rate. It's maybe 2 decades. I don't know. But there will be others who will be coming. And I think it's really important for us to, as folks are coming on and we're onboarding them, we're really training what is the role of the commission and the commission member. I think that may have kind of gotten lost the last several years. And so that could also help in this process. So anyway, I think if we can, I don't want to cut us short, but it's 10:30 and we've got quite a number of other items on the agenda. Andrea's here too. Hello, welcome.
Hi, Andrea.
Thank you. Sorry, I was late. I was talking about the office's work in another.
Great. Okay, so I'll turn it back over to you, Duan, for planning 2021.
Yeah, so just the next agenda items to talk about the administration of this particular committee. Do the 4 of you want to have like quarterly meetings? Do you want to do it ad hoc? Last year we decided to do it ad hoc. I think there was a suggestion from staff last year, perhaps we have it on the calendar maybe every other month and then cancel as needed. And I think at that time Eric and Bonachet thought it was smaller. There was just the 3 of us, and so it would be better just to do it ad hoc. But I need direction from you so that I can start calendaring the meetings.
I'd like the idea of quarterly meetings. We can always add additional meetings if necessary.
Yeah, I think now that we've expanded back to the 4, I think it's necessary for us to have something quarterly. On the calendar.
Yeah, okay. And then would you like to have it? Would you like us to have it so it's before the quarterly commission meetings, because that might be then a good opportunity for us to like plan for the next meeting. So perhaps 2 or 3 weeks before, so we can do some planning.
Sounds great.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's especially helpful for the people who chair those meetings to have a pre-meeting with us to sort of try out what they have in mind talking to the commission about. I think it'd be very useful for them.
Perfect. So I will send out a doodle poll I'll suggest some dates and then send out a doodle poll. And then how about the length of time? Would you like the meetings to be? 2 hours?
I think 2 hours makes
2
sense.
Hours? Okay. Yeah. Okay. Are there any other administrative things related to XCOM?
Yeah, I have to say that Zoom meetings make life a lot easier. Even after this pandemic is over, going downtown to the state bar offices is a whole day's commitment. This is much better, and I'd like to continue using this device.
Yeah, the Zoom has been helpful. I would say with the one exception of like when we do discretionary grants, like HP was an example, that when we're in the room together, pointing out applications, the big spreadsheets, the maps, it's a lot easier. That was a little bit unwieldy. And I don't know about you guys, but not having the materials printed out, like I had it all electronical, which I'm going to actually print out next time was hard. But I think there are going to be some meetings that we should probably do in person, but like XCOM, I agree. I mean, makes it so much easier.
And I think there's something about we're all of us being in a room together. It's those breaks and the conversations that we have, and it helps to continue to build and foster deeper relationships between the commission members and the staff.
Yeah.
So yeah, if we can kind of do a hybrid, but I agree, this is so much easier than trying to find parking and
Yeah.
going
Yeah.
over the bridge.
Yeah, especially with the amount of meetings that we have from all the committee, subcommittees and the commission. I mean, it's a very, everybody knows that this commission is a heavy lift for our volunteers. So, yeah. But I don't think that's something we need to discuss for at least another 6 months when things are back to normal. And then obviously at that time, we can think about the remainder of the year and how we want to move some of those meetings in person or not.
That vaccine's rolling out.
Yeah, that is if we're able to do that
Yeah.
in 2021.
Yeah.
Okay, shall we
Okay.
move on to item C?
Yes. So I just wanted to give you a heads up on this agenda item because it's also on the commission agenda item. As you heard at the last commission meeting, one of the recommendations that came out from the Rules Committee as we were looking into the definition of indigency and giving some more clarification, because the statute provides, some categories, but it left open kind of interpretation of those categories. Like, for instance, what gets counted as income and what doesn't get counted as income. So the Rules Committee was moving towards a very kind of flexible reading of income and providing really clear guidance to the community and a recommendation that would be a state bar rule. Through that codification process, the legal services community, convened through LAC and expressed a desire to want to change the IELTS statute to bring up the client eligibility threshold. And as you recall, this is something that's been talked in our office 10, 20 years, right, Dan? It's always been something that we know that 125 federal poverty level is very low. It's outdated. That statute was created in the 80s. It's just not with the modern times and other comparable grant making body. Like LSE is at 200. So it's definitely something that has always been talked about with amongst the commission, staff, the community, but there hadn't seemed to be a moment where there was alignment for various reasons. It was discussed the most, I think, thoroughly in 2018 during the stakeholder working group process, which Rich was involved in. And one of the tasks of that working group was to see should we pursue a statutory change, not just for the income threshold, for the funding formula, for everything. Let's do a revamp of the entire statute. At that point, it was believed that that wasn't the right political moment to do that. So now that, the State Bar and the Rules Committee got this request from the legal services community, it really prompted the Rules Committee in particular to think, is this kind of the right time to pursue this very narrow, not opening up the whole statute, but narrowly just increasing the 125% threshold. So we did talk to executive staff, and then the executive staff's thinking is that if the community is actually in alignment, then perhaps the State Bar and the commission would come out in support of it. There's a question though, because we received the feedback through LAC that, and it was portrayed to us in the memo and also at the Rules Committee meeting that there was consensus around an increase, but what increase it is, it wasn't clear to us. And I don't think that they delved into that clearly. So the Rules Committee and staff have been working, and Jim Meeker in particular, and Amin and Eric and I have been working to do more analysis in terms of like the implication. If we went up to 200%, what would be the impacts of that? And then also one thing that the community did not consider that was brought up at the Rules Committee is right now the funding formula and eligibility requirement, the 125 runs in tandem. So eligibility is at 125 and we run the funding formula in parallel with that 125. So the funding formula, we base it on 125% of the federal poverty level. So the number of people in each county below 125. If we change the eligibility, do we need to change the funding formula to run in parallel? So the staff and Jim, we've been working the last 5-6 weeks to run that additional analysis. And I'm just previewing this for you. We're going to go into a little bit more depth at next week's meeting. Is that there's going to be some shifts in terms of some funding going out of rural areas, not across the board. If we were to move it to 200 or the HUD standard of income, there would be some shifts in funding. So the recommendation, at least now from the Rules Committee and staff, is to, if you increase client eligibility to 200 or AMI, that you keep the funding formula the same. But we wanted to share this analysis with the community and then send out a survey to make sure and to confirm that we have confirmation that the community is in support. This is all being done on a really short timeline because we'd like to present it to the Board of Trustees sometime early next year. So the question for XCOM is the Rules Committee, you'll see the memo that comes out today that we drafted with Amin and the Rules Committee, is that to delegate the final recommendation to a body of 3 commissioners on the Rules Committee to work with staff to finalize that recommendation. So I wanted to preview that for you because so you're not surprised that that's the recommendation and why it's not coming back to the commission unless you think that it would be worthwhile. We're running into a little bit of a timing in that you're not meeting until February, and we would like to, if it's possible, we don't know if it is possible at this juncture, to bring it perhaps to a January board meeting. It's still very tight. That's very aspirational, but if it is possible, but ideally we'd like to get that data if there's support in the community, then to give it to LAC to do their advocacy. I don't know if you have initial thoughts on.
I fully support that aspiration. I just think, and now is the time in the current climate to be trying to move this forward. I think it's, it's very belated. And so I think everything we can do to move this forward. I mean, we haven't seen what the ramifications are if you try to match the 2 versus if you don't.
Yeah.
There will always be programs that, are not happy, those that are, but I mean, we're really doing this for access to justice. And that's, to me, sort of the theme of moving this forward.
I'm interested in the funding shift potential. I wonder if the result would be that more funds would be allocated to the larger, better established urban programs as opposed to others.
So, and that's, yes, and it is. And it's not clear, but you're going to see the more detailed analysis. We have an Office of Research at the State Bar. One of them is an economist, another has a PhD in statistician that helped us run this analysis. So it's pretty technical, but you'll be very impressed. And we had on our side, the commission side, Jim Meeker, who we pulled in just to, verify that, their analysis was in line with, and so everybody's kind of has been in agreement with the analysis that we will present to you, the commission, next week. And then we are holding a webinar with the community to show them the analysis. And really that the statute hasn't been changed in 30 years. So if we're going to do a change, we want it to be a thoughtful process. We want it to be based on not only, the community's feedback, but really data driven. And so that's why we spent so much time on the data piece that we're looking forward to sharing with you next week.
What is the impact? I mean, I support it as well. What is the impact, quite apart from funding shifts as between counties or cities or whatever? What is the impact on the number of people who will be eligible to be funded?
Yeah, so we're right now, we base our data on the American Community Survey, which is over 5 years. That survey is over 5 years. So currently, with the latest ACS survey, it's about 7.5 million people that are eligible below the 125%. If we go up to 200, it becomes about 12.5. But you have to keep in mind, and this is where we need to emphasize to both the commission and the community, there are programs right now that serve above 125. As you know, the most prominent ones are LSC programs because their funding can be up to 200, but they're prohibited from counting those expenditures for qualifying purposes in determining our grant. So it's not necessarily that more people would be served, though I think there will be a correlation, but it's that more money will be, more expenditures will be counted in the calculation of that. And what we suspect is that for the mid-range programs and the smaller programs that are not LSC funded, that it would open the door because, a lot of our funding, a lot of the programs use our funding is predominant funding. So if we have restrictions on IELTS and EF, then they're just not going to fund above the 125. So this will give it flexibility in terms of what clients will be served, I think, generally. But we have to keep kind of that nuance in mind, that it's not that programs aren't serving above 125 right now, but they will be able to serve more, and they will be able to count all those additional clients as qualified expenditures. The one thing that we have to keep in mind, though, and that we need to really emphasize with the community is that, yes, we want to do this in support and partnership with them to provide them with flexibility, but opening it up, raising that threshold is going to mean that over time, more programs are going to be eligible for funding, and that in a time where IOLTA funding is a record low, it's going to dilute the funding somewhat. The question that we've been getting a lot, and that's been impossible for us to answer, is if you move it up to 200, how many more programs are going to be eligible? We can't answer that number. I can give you a general sense that we've been receiving between 3 and 5 new applications. Last year we got 6 new applications, and we ended up funding 2 of them. I can give you that kind of data, but I can't. We don't even have a handle exactly on how many programs out there are legal aid organizations that are non-IOLTA funded. We have somewhat of a sense because the Access Commission has done a map of some of these, but it's very hard to get that number, and then to know how, if we moved up to 200, how many of them would come apply, and how, that is just, we can't answer that. And we've tried to look at it at lots of different angles, but that's hard. Andrea, I'm sorry, you were gonna say something.
Oh, no, I was just gonna add on that while we can't answer that, with precision, Duan, I know when we've talked about it, I think it's fair to say it's certainly not going to be the floodgates. It's not like there's 100 other organizations doing this work that we've never heard of, right?
No.
So, I think we feel it's probably going to be pretty limited, even with that increase in terms of who's doing this work that would otherwise be able to qualify. Just to maybe
it might not be the floodgates, but you might need to keep in mind that because it's based on qualified expenditures, there have been some organizations that have, they're under the impression that they wouldn't qualify. And if they came in and they're at a $10 million expenditures, even though it might be one program, it would dilute it somewhat. So yeah, I agree. It wouldn't open the floodgates. We're not going to get even probably 20 applications or 10 applications, I imagine, in a given year. But even a couple might have some shifts. What that is, we can't predict. But so the programs need to know that in case a few years down the line, their ward allocation may go down. So that's our main. I think we have a responsibility to communicate the implications of it to the community, so that they can make an informed decision if they want us to support the change.
You might end up with a bias in favor of support centers that doesn't presently exist as well, because support centers are involved in impact kind of things. And
but we sent out so the webinar, we're gonna have a webinar with the legal aid community that's gonna happen right after the commission meeting, the 17th, and we sent it out, and instantly there were like 60-70 people that registered, and people have been calling Erica and I, and there's a lot of interest in this. We're a little bit hesitant because it's the end of the year. We've had to send out other surveys to them, but the community is really kind of excited about this, and we have made it very clear, though, this is just really exploratory at this point. And again, if there's not consensus in the community, the state bar and the commission most likely will not go on a limb to issue a support for it. So everybody's aware of what's going on. But with that said, the calendar, it's like kind of narrow. So that's why we'd like, if possible, to delegate authority to a few commissioners, and who we thought was Amin from the Rules Committee, because he's the chair of the Rules Committee. Jim, who's really has been working. We have weekly calls with him to go over the data, and he's we drafted the survey for the programs, and he reviewed it, and we have his sign off on their survey. So he's really worked with us, and he's also on the Access Commission, so he has that kind of access lens to it. And the third person is Catherine Blakemore, who's also on the Rules Committee, was from my IOLTA program, that understands the funding formula.
Disability rights, yeah.
Yep.
Well, I agree with the rest of my colleagues. I think this is definitely timely, and having that smaller group will allow for them to be nimble and to move hopefully expeditiously. So this all sounds great. We look forward to the larger conversation on the 15th.
Yeah, we look forward to sharing with you and getting feedback and thoughts, and if there's more analysis that needs to be done.
Okay, great. So shall we move on to D, discussing the process for administration of provisional
Yes.
license? Yeah, tell
So
us about this.
In the meeting materials, I attached the legislation, AB 3362. So this amended the State Bar Budget Act to provide for, right now, the annual attorney licensing fee bill provides for a $40 opt-out. So you know, if you recall, when you pay your license fee, there are certain categories you can either opt in or opt out. There's one in the opt out, which you have to affirmatively opt out for it to be taken out of your fee bill, is $40 that goes to the Justice Gap, which goes to IOLTA funding. The legislature has now increased that $40 by $5. That $5 is going to go to fund provisional licensees, and these are the new graduates that have not passed the bar exam. And as you all know, the bar exam is moved to remote bar exam. So for various reasons, either, you know, work-life balance or whatnot, they decided to not take the remote exam, or they took it and then didn't pass. This provides them with an opportunity to be provisionally licensed in the state of California and practice. And then there are parameters around that. But this would fund a certain number of those provisional licensee. When we did initial kind of, it's hard to kind of predict, but we think that with this funding, this $5, it might fund between 3 to 5 fellows or licensees. We won't know until the fee until we start collecting the fee bill early next year. We think it's 3 to 5, so it's not a large amount of funding. We have been fielding the requests have been trickling in. I think Andrea got a question from a program. I fielded about four questions. Andrea and Elizabeth are doing a presentation for the law school assembly. So we think that there's going to be interest. It's hard to predict. I don't know how many applications are going to come through. It's just that there's not going to be a large amount of money. So the question for XCOM is how it's supposed to be distributed through the Legal Services Trust Fund Commission to IOLTA funded organizations, to QSPs and support centers is who. So the license, the provisional licensee would be working at one of our QSPs, and then the commission would determine you know, which programs would get the funding. So the question for XCOM is, do you want to create a subcommittee to review this? The staff recommendation, because it does seem like the commission feels quite stretched, is to have it be a staff-led process, because it's not that many applications, but to designate a certain body, and perhaps it's XCOM, to be our oversight. We would then do a report to you, how many applications, we would run by you what the application would look like, and then we give you a recommendation, but you would need to be in the weeds reviewing them with us. That would be the staff recommendation.
So the recommendation would be to have staff drive a process overseen by a subcommittee initially to make recommendations to the full commission.
Yeah, and I'm formulating this. We've just been formulating this the last few weeks because this is all very new. And perhaps instead of carving out another subcommittee, maybe it's just XCOM if you're open to it, or if you know.
I think we can start out that way, and if the work is light, then it's not a problem. If it's heavy, we can make a different decision in the future.
Yeah, I echo what Rich just said.
Yeah, so give room for modification, but perhaps start out like that.
Yeah.
I would hope this could be a much more streamlined process than our HP RFP.
Oh, no. And I'm thinking in the design of the application that it's even though it's competitive, I'm actually trying to stay away. The language of the legislation is competitive grant process, but we don't call it an RFP because the RFP is very charged and that they have to put together a big proposal. I'm thinking more of an application. You know, we know our programs. They tell us a little bit, submit the resume of the licensee. We make some decision, but you know, there should be some barometer because we don't know how many applications we're going to get. It'll be easy, obviously. We can fund 3 to 5 and we get 6, right? We just don't know the volume of applications we're going to get.
I mean, so, when I listen to this, it almost sounds like, this is just my instinctive reaction, like we're going to end up privileging the great organizations that we already think are wonderful. So like if Public Counsel or one of the other big time stars says they want to fund a couple applicants versus some rural project that we've never heard of, we're going to end up I mean, this could be
Well, I don't
totally
know. I
wrong.
don't know necessarily that, and that would be a question for the subcommittee.
Well, you're right.
Staff
You're
will
right.
have
I'm
a
just talking
proposal
about my
because
head.
the legislation doesn't actually provide, unlike HP, a preference for certain things. But I can imagine us maybe wanting to preference perhaps rural areas and
Sure, maybe.
and selecting, some, licensees from there. But that yeah, the commission would have that discretion.
I mean, let me strike a little bit of a different note from what Bonifay and Rich just said. I mean, I wonder, now that I think about it, whether it wouldn't be better to just create a small committee of like 2 commissioners to work with staff and come up with a recommendation rather than burdening this XCOM with having to go through all that. My instinct is that that will end up being more efficient. Just a thought. I don't care. We can go either
No,
way.
and that's not a bad, and that's why I wanted to get your thoughts. It's not a bad suggestion. I guess my concern then is who the 2 would be, because Bonachet and I have been checking with commissioners and they feel like it's a lot. So who would we?
Okay, well, I was thinking this would be a way to groom some talent, maybe pick some people that may want to do this and give an opportunity to lead an effort. But unless you think no one's interested, because they're all
No,
too-
and I don't know. That's why I wanted to be a discussion. I just the general feedback I've been hearing though is that the commission has been a lot of work. That's why the staff recommendation was hesitant to create another subcommittee. So that's, but
I mean, if the other 3 of you really think XCOM should do it, I don't care. I'm happy to do it. Just
I think if we since we're already meeting, if it's something that we could begin the discussion to see the weight, as Rich said, and then we can always pivot and pass it off to other folks on the committee.
I agree. I think Rich was suggesting that we try it this way first, and then, if necessary, form a committee. Am I understanding this? Is there sort of a matching process that's going to happen? Matching?
not us matching. I think what I'm envisioning is that the programs would apply and they come with an idea of who they want to fund, instead of us processing two applications and matching. But I have to be honest, like I haven't given it like a ton of thought. We were probably going to have, I was going to supervise another probably senior program analyst and do a draft application or proposal to bring forward.
I mean, is this going to work something like, the Shriver Fellows? I mean, I'm just kind of trying to understand how this.
Oh, what's the Shriver Fellows, Kim? I don't know if I'm familiar.
Those are the folks that through Shriver funding end up in QLSPs working for.
Oh, I didn't know that they were funding fellowships for that. I don't
know if they're called fellowships, but I mean they're funded through Shriver. And so anyway, I'm just curious. I mean, we don't need to get into the weeds now, but I was just trying to think about how this process will work. So, but I'm fine with what Rich suggested. I think initially it's a good way to start. I know
how it will work, I can't answer, but having been a Shriver grantee, it was the legal services that got the money to do a certain aspect of the Shriver project, and then they would hire the staffing or use existing staffing. So it was a little different in that particular case. I think there's going to be a lot of interest. So I think managing expectations of the community is a big piece of this. So what we're communicating at the Law School Assembly tomorrow, this isn't some amazing sweeping answer to for hundreds or thousands of people, right? So I think we doing some good communication, and we can strategize more at the forefront, just so people don't. The questions I've already gotten have been like from law school folks saying, "Oh, this is so great! Now we can have all these people go through this program." And I think it's a great program, but it's not going to be that in terms of volume. And we don't want to get 10,000 applicants for 6 spots.
Yeah, which will we have to recalibrate if we end up getting even hundreds of applications for 5 positions. I mean, that's okay. So if you guys are in agreement, then that I'll draft a motion that we'll present to the commission next week, and then we're hoping to release applications sometime the first quarter of next year, just because the law schools and the provisional licensees are a bit anxious. Great.
Great. All right. Looks like we're going to be finishing early here. So the last item, discussing 2021 Legal Services Trust Fund Commission priorities.
And Eric, Eric had requested to put this item on the agenda today. So Eric, I'll hand it over to you to facilitate.
Yeah, I mean, maybe we've already covered it, frankly, in talking about the calendar and how we're going to deal with the challenges that we face. So I guess I don't really have anything specific to add. I guess I'll just kind of leave it at that, unless anybody else thinks there's anything we should address. Let me mention one thing. It sort of came up in the first agenda item when we were talking about the workload and things like that and how to streamline it. I do want to reiterate a point that Rich kind of hinted at or alluded to, but at the risk of repeating a little bit. I thought that the applications, the RFP applications for the HP funding were, at least I found them to be, and I know the committee made a great effort to do this quickly, and I think they were good, but I found them to be a little bit tedious to read, to go through. I found that to me, there was a lot of repetition, and I just felt like, get to the point. I wanted to just kind of jump around. And I actually thought staff's spreadsheet was really good. And I was wondering if there's a way we could think about redesigning applications so that there just be some kind of a summary sheet up front that kind of hits the highlights of the application quickly and efficiently, like in 1 or 2 pages, and then refers in appendices to sort of more detail. And for example, things like how much formula funding is the applicant getting? How is this program going to be different than what you're doing in your formula? What is a short description of what you're doing? How many FTEs are you contemplating? Things like that. I would find more user friendly. It's just a general observation. I don't know that we have to do anything about it, but it was just an observation that I had. Other than that,
I think that's a good observation, sort of like a term sheet that you'd see in front of a bigger agreement, and let them fill it out themselves. I think that makes sense. I did have a priority. I haven't run this by anybody yet, but I don't know if it really rises to that level. But the commissioners, have the role of serving QLSPs and support centers. But unless we're involved in audits, we're really not able to communicate with them directly, meet with them, understand what their needs are, who they serve, what parts of the community our grants are impacting, what stumbling blocks there are, and so on. And I wonder if once every 2 years or 3 years, there couldn't be a session, a working group session, that brought together the stakeholders and breaks it up into smaller groups so it doesn't become a lecture, where we get an opportunity to meet face to face with the QLSPs and the support centers and to talk to them sort of off the record, not through the formalities that we typically use, to make commissioners more aware of the work that is being funded by them. And I think that the board members of the trustees of the state bar who we serve, who rubber stamp what we do, and so long as we're in this configuration, they ought to be included. Debbie Manning was assigned to this commission. She's no longer doing that. But our relationship with the trustees is legalistic. They actually have the responsibility for what we do. If something goes haywire, the press is going to look to them, not to us. And I think so this once every 2 or 3 year idea that I have to commingle the stakeholders, and the Judicial Council should be part of it, I think too, is only to enable commissioners to get a much quicker and better understanding of what our role is, where we fit, and what we're actually accomplishing. And it would also give us a chance to talk to staff face to face, which I can't tell you how beneficial I think that is. So Just an idea. I think it's a priority, but it's something we haven't ever done in 12 years or however long I've done this. So I think it'd be great.
That's a great idea. And I don't know if you'll recall, but we used to have programs come and give short presentations about the great work that they do. And you know, one of the feedback that we received was that it felt like we were perhaps privileging some programs that then the commission would understand their work and not featuring, you know, the other 95 programs. And so then we scaled back from doing that. But perhaps there's a way for us to design you know, because I know private foundations, when you apply for funding, there's an interview process and you get to meet the grantee, and it's a little bit more involved. I think the amount of grantees that we have, that would be unfeasible. Perhaps we could do something, but we just have to be careful in the selection of who we meet with, because there might be an appearance of, again, privileging some programs over others.
Yeah, I think, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Now, I was just going to say what I particularly like about what you said, Rich, is involving the Board of Trustees, which I think, you know, there were attempts, well, I don't need to revisit the history, but the more we can provide the trustees with information about what these programs are doing, and open up and strengthen the lines of communication with the trustees, the better. That's always been something that a number of us thought was really, really important, and just has not gone on in a consistent way.
Mm-hmm. I mean, one of the problems that we've discussed is the possibility of spinning off and having the commission as a standalone. And as a practical matter, that's what we are. I wouldn't want to be a trustee responsible for the work of this commission without knowing more about what we do. And so as to match the legal rubric with the practical rubric, we should be a spinoff. But until that comes, let's meet with the trustees, let them see that we take this work seriously, that we are invested in it. Let them hear Eric talk about the burden that we all have. They need to know there's a lot of work being done on their behalf in their name. And I think that the disconnect can be harmful.
And I think we made a lot of headway the past year. I mean, Chris and Debbie were really engaged as liaisons, and I suspect our new liaison will be just as engaged, if not more. So I think, you know, I think it's, you know, and we'll lean on Andrea to help you know, navigate that and build that relationship with the Board of Trustee members. But I feel like it's been really productive. I mean, Debbie was hand in hand with us as we're going through the discussion of IELTA, whether to cut or not to cut. And she was really instrumental in, like, when Bonachet and I went to present at the board, she was like, I've been part of the analysis. I fully support the commission's recommendation. We'd had a single question, Bonachet and I.
Yeah,
I mean, it was
yeah,
seamless.
the relationship that's been created between the Board of Trustees having the liaisons with us, I think it has shifted so much. And I really agree with you, Rich, in terms of having the stakeholders there. And I like the fact that you added judicial council, and perhaps I would say COAF as well. You know, the more we bring in the Office of Access and Inclusion together, the better. But I think the part that really stood out for me in what you said, Rich, is that it allows the commission members and all the stakeholders to understand where they fall in the process. Right, because it's really easy for us to kind of become, you know, just kind of myopic and in our own world and not understand how all of the different stakeholders play a role, and how much politics plays a role, as much as we may not want to talk about that. But there are all these different layers that play a role in the work that we do. And the more we're able to come together, the better. And the more we'll understand, you know, are we all on the same page? You know, are we all going in the same direction? Is the goal the same for all of us? And we can tweak as we need as we're going along. I wholeheartedly agree that we should do these however you want to, convenings or gatherings or informal tea parties. I don't know, whatever.
Workshop.
Not the political tea party.
Yeah.
No, this is real tea.
This is real tea.
It's theme, but I like the concept. No, this is actually really helpful. Just context for me to have. So I did have a chance to connect with Christine when she became the liaison separately, and she seems very enthusiastic and engaged, which I think is a good start. And hopefully we'll have our second liaison soon. But I'm actually doing the training for 4 new board members this Friday on the office. So this is helpful because I'll make sure to really emphasize and some of these things, and note that there are additional opportunities, even if you're not the liaison, and maybe we can continue to brainstorm I'm happy to do whatever I can to help with making sure we're having good communication with the board and they're aware of the scale of the work and the importance of the work. But I think those are great ideas, and the more we can be connected and the board can be connected and understand what's happening here, I think the better.
Can I ask also a slightly different track here? One of the things that came up from the HP process, RFP, was sort of the weakness of evaluation of materials on evaluation. Are we doing anything on that to try to strengthen how programs evaluate their results and communicate their results?
That's a really good question, Eric. And there used to be on the commission a reboot committee that was staff driven, but there are commissioners that are on, actually Donna was on the reboot committee when she was a commissioner, and Corey really led those efforts at the tail end of that. And I know if you recall, part of the reboot commission was to design our main economic benefits analysis, that what we collect in what we require grantees. It was Dan, remind me, 5 to 8 years. I mean, it was quite a lengthy process of redesigning that, getting community to buy in to collect that type of data. And we started collecting that data 3 or 4 years now. I don't know if you recall when Rocio was in the office, Rocio, Dan, Elizabeth, and I worked on that impact report, 2018 impact report. We've said to the community, because there was such a heavy lift of rolling out the new data reporting, that we're not going to do any major changes, at least for a few years, because they had to redesign a lot of their CMS system to collect our new data. And that's why it was such a lengthy process. And then to be in agreement with all the different codes. With that said, though, I think as we've heard, and from Jim and from Herman, there still could be a lot more that's done to provide them with assistance in terms of evaluations. They are required to submit a lot of evaluative reports to us, but on main economic benefits, there are grant specific reportings. There's a partnership one, there's an EF one, bank grant has one, HP has one. So there's already a lot of requirements, but if we wanted to help them with other types of, it's just, we don't have a mechanism right now. Not that it shouldn't be done, but the reboot committee was quite a heavy lift in this office.
Well, the evaluation materials, I mean, I've been on the partnership grants committee and I've looked at the evaluations that get submitted, and they're pretty soft. I mean, they're these kind of high level letters from the court saying, yeah, we like the project, but there's not a lot of hard data about things that have been accomplished, evictions that have been prevented, cases that have been won.
Oh, but there are maybe not. I'm not as familiar. I'm not as close as partnership, and maybe Dan can speak to that. But it definitely with the bank grants and HP grant, yeah, we asked how many evictions have been prevented. The number of soft landings. There are a lot, right, Kim? Christine did a presentation, remember, earlier this year about some of the preliminary bank grant data. I don't know with partnership, maybe it's not as robust.
I can't speak to that a little bit. It's been very difficult historically to get outcome information from people who are essentially doing self-representation and self-help, because the staff's not present to find out what happens, and people don't want to come back and report on it. But I do agree, and I think it's been agreed for a long time, that what we do get isn't very strong. So we are working closely now with a researcher at the Judicial Council who has developed a pretty robust evaluation package for the court's self-help systems. And she's helping integrate those components into the partnership evaluation. I think that might be a good sort of pilot for bringing more evaluative rigor, I should say, into some of the other projects, but they're sort of piloting it with partnerships to, for example, have all of the projects potentially ask the same satisfaction questions. So we actually have comparisons between them and we can look at things globally. It's been very challenging up till now, though.
But for our other grants, like HP bank grants, we ask, and IELTS EF too, at the time when a case is closed, we know that the gold standard in evaluations is if we can track the outcome of a client 6 months, a year, 2 years, but that's very, very expensive to do. And most programs don't have that bandwidth. That's why we don't require it, because it would be quite a heavy lifting. So right now they report when the case is closed, what was achieved at that point.
Well, like this year, the Justice and Diversity Center of the SF Bar was on our list, a program you and Andrea are quite familiar with. And what I guess they were pitching a program that was more or less a continuation of something they'd already been doing. So my question to Christine, our staff member, was, oh, great. Well, let's look at the evaluation, see how well they're doing. Has it been good? And the answer I got was, well, they didn't submit it yet because they didn't have to or something, given the timeline. So we didn't really have, maybe eventually they'll submit an evaluation, but it wasn't really available to evaluate this year's.
Yeah, and this year I have to say was a little bit, obviously with everything happening, our grant evaluations are typically due in March, and that's when partnership grants start rolling. We gave a lot of extensions because, as you all know, March, April, May, even until now, programs are struggling, and not that this is, evaluations aren't important, but they were gearing up to transition to remote work, and so we gave them those extensions pretty generously.
I do think that evaluation historically was, I'm talking about when I started in like 2000, this was an add-on. It was something essentially being done to make sure people did their work. We're now able to use that data and draw conclusions from it, build, pictures out of it. So we're working really hard on bringing the evaluation into a process with the application, so we can look at everything together and build them off of each other, instead of having each one be a kind of a set. We give a grant and then we get an evaluation. That should all feed into the next piece, but it's a process that is evolving.
Eric,
Thank you.
when you say evaluation, Eric, are you really want to look at outcomes?
Yeah, in part anyway, yes.
Because that's
How
a
many
little,
people
to me, that's a little, wasn't really sure. When you say evaluation, that could be interpreted a few ways. I mean, the program can do a self-evaluation, but if you're looking at outcomes to be able to put forward for future funding, that's an important,
Yeah, I think that
important tool.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, like, how many are we helping anybody? I guess really is the question. We're spending a lot of money, and are we making people's lives better? That's really what we want to figure out. I mean, I think we are, probably. I think we think we are, but it would be nice to have some, more concrete support for that.
So we do. So maybe we just, as a staff, need to do a better job sharing that data with you. And again, like, we issued a 2018 impact report that was a heavy lift. And we have thought about not doing a full report every year, but perhaps an update to those numbers, because we have the aggregated numbers. So I think perhaps it's just us building in, and maybe February might, I don't want to promise, because it is heavy lifting to us to aggregate and then do some analysis to present to you. But perhaps sometime next year we could share the data so that the commissioners, the full commission, can have the benefit of that. Because a lot of the data is there. And the bank grant committee has delved into it. Kim and Rich, I don't know if you recall, but we looked at what was achieved in the last few cycles. We're going to put it in a fancier report and share it, but we've looked at the preliminary data, and it's remarkable.
Yeah, I think that Kim's question goes to the heart of it. What are you really looking for? One of the things that you always look for when you're in grant making business is how many touches do you have? And the numbers are staggering. But a simple touch here doesn't necessarily mean the kind of outcome you want. And you want to use the data to fund those programs that have the most impact. Well, that's a really tough one. That is, at the working group that we had stakeholders meeting, one of the QLSPs got up who wasn't funded and said they did some impact litigation that permitted people who couldn't afford to renew their licenses, some by way of litigation. A lot of people were reinstated with their driver's license. And the numbers that were impacted were tens of thousands of people. And so you're right, your intuition's correct, but it sure would be helpful and a good guidance for all of us to look for programs that have the greatest impact on the community we serve.
Yeah. And sometimes it's hard from just the numbers alone. Like, you know, with the bank grant, for example, the community development work, it was really difficult for us design and evaluation because there is such varying projects that wasn't applicable. We had a design of a question. So a lot of that is really tucked into the narrative of those questions. I was on a site visit yesterday to a program that had a bank grant, and they told me an amazing story about how they were a support center providing technical assistance to the Inland Empire and was able to you know, through you know, this housing element work, Kim, get thousands more of affordable housing built in Riverside. We didn't know that. I mean, that's the thing. There wasn't quite a question like that. So yeah, yes, we could do a better job, but there is some data that exists right now that we could do more. But I am confident I could say this, that you know, the funding that we provide and programs that are doing the work are having a real impact to the community. I don't think there's any doubt with that. We just have to do a good job of communicating that.
Yeah, I don't either. I wouldn't be here, but it would be, you know, it would be helpful to see it. You know, while we're thinking about recruiting new members, I wonder if we should think about looking for a Silicon Valley data genius who can figure out some way of putting all this together for us.
Oh, that would be amazing. Andrea, do you know anybody we could?
Yeah, you've got one, Jim Meeker. Jim Meeker fits the bill, although
well, he does. Maybe another one like that.
Well, also, I mean, I was doing a ton of partnering in my prior job with, you know, the big tech companies, legal departments. They're all doing more pro bono now. So I think there's more connection and understanding, at least within the legal departments, of this work. So I think both possible other tech geniuses, possible funding. This is a bigger topic I definitely want to explore. To the data point related, I think that this sector, not just this, it's not a state bar specific challenge trying to measure the impact of pro bono, legal aid giving, legal services. I think as a sector, it's something that, you know, every conference I've gone to for the past 10 years, we've been like, how do we measure impact better? So, you know, I think I'm excited to work with John and see, you know, what we might have done in the past and what we can do in the future. But, you know, I think it's not a challenge unique to us, even though I know that the impact is happening. And it's not only the data, but, you know, making sure that we're also capturing the stories, right? The personal stories that make civil legal aid sound as meaningful, moving as it is, right? Because, you know, as a term, especially as a non-lawyer who doesn't do this work, it might not sound like the most exciting thing compared to other kinds of housing, food support, whatever it is. So anyway, that was a little bit of, not to go down.
Actually, Andrea, you're speaking to something that we did years back when Stephanie was director of the office.
Yeah.
Do you remember, Kim and Rich? We did a whole like social media campaign around our work. We had brought actually clients who had been served by the programs, and we had them speak to the impact, and it was really all geared towards increasing funds, obviously, and eyeballs to the work. Do you guys remember? Do you remember that initiative?
Well, I do remember because we also had to write out something about why someone should support the commission. And
That's right.
I had some quote on the State Bar website. I was like, but it was, yeah, we definitely did a PR campaign. One of the things I wanted to jump back to, which I think is a great idea.
Yeah, it was really successful. You guys might want to try to find it. Yeah. It was really successful.
Yeah, thank you for that history. I would love to talk about what we can do, you know, a new iteration of something like that.
When Dwan mentioned the housing element and the impact on the number of affordable units that were developed, I mean, that harkens back to a discussion we had with the support centers, which is how you sometimes need to look at them differently. And I think we really need to think about how we get their data. and how, for example, of course, we always use Mike as an example, but because we're so familiar with him and the work he does, but the impact of his housing element work, and the number of people that are favorably impacted, not just touched, because touched is like what the Legal Services Corporation always wanted to know, you know, just pure numbers, not really outcome, but just numbers. And so, you know, we want to have a deeper, more kind of quality impact analysis.
Yeah, and I think you're right, Kim. Support centers is our biggest deficiency in our evaluations. It's not geared towards, our evaluations are geared towards direct services. It does not capture the impact work well.
So for that, I think we could quite easily bring together a representative from every support center in California and have that discussion. And I think we want to do it for our purposes, but there's also a lot of goodwill in bringing that together.
Yeah, I think that probably is a bit more doable because there's 22 of them versus 100 programs.
Yeah. I mean, that's something we could do, I think, quite easily.
You know, I thought we used to ask in our evaluation reports that the grant recipients write up typical success stories that they've had.
Yeah, we still do that.
It's on the EAF grant.
Yep, EAF grants.
We could collate those, it might be useful.
Yeah, and we have in the past, you know, and Judicial Council Bonnie will ask me to pull those because she puts into a report that she shares with Judicial Council and you know, other bodies and stuff. But yeah, we can definitely share that. Oh, you're on mute, Eric. I don't. Oh. No, that's weird. We can't hear you. Sorry.
Okay. I'm not sure what happened to our friend Eric. Are you, you could hear us though, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Maybe Zoom laryngitis came in, I don't know. All right. So all of this is so great. It's so wonderful, honestly, to have 4 minds on these topics. And we tried, Eric and I, this last year, but and I hope we didn't fail the commission with just the 2 of us, but having all of these additional thoughts and eyes and experience on all of these topics are fantastic. So with that said, I think that pretty much completes the agenda items. Is that correct on your
That is
side
correct.
as well? Okay. All right. So shall I receive a motion to adjourn here? Okay. And is there a second?
Kim. So
Kim, you're going to have to speak because Eric. Yeah.
Second.
Okay,
great.
All right. Thank you guys very much.
Okay, bye.
Have a great day. Bye-bye, everyone.
Dude.
Thanks, Bonacci.
Thank you all.